I'm Marlene Bishop, 33 years old, and every time we gather as a family, it's like my brother's voice somehow fills the room before anyone else gets a chance to speak. It was Easter lunch just after church. We were all crowded around the old oak table when he looked right at me across the mashed potatoes and deviled eggs and said, "Not everyone's cut out for a real job in tech." I didn't react. I just reached for another biscuit. But then my grandmother laid her fork down and said something that stopped the whole room cold. "So you bought his company out of pity before I go any further." Tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to keep quiet while someone else got all the credit. I grew up in southern Indiana, a town with one blinking light and 2 grocery stores where folks stayed put, and everyone had a casserole dish with their name etched on the bottom. Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. Dad ran the local hardware store, and our front porch was always swept clean by 6:30 in the morning. My parents believed in hard work and good manners, and they raised us to be decent above all else. My brother Eli and I were 2 years apart, but you wouldn't have guessed it by the way people treated us. He was the bright one, the boy who won science fairs without trying, who could take apart the toaster and actually fix it. Mom called him brilliant. Dad said he'd change the world. Folks at church used to pat his head and tell him God had big plans for him. Me, I was the quiet kid, the one who liked drawing charts and asking questions. I spent afternoons in the back room reorganizing the library card catalog, just for fun. I liked solving things too, just not with wires or code. While Eli stayed up building programs, I stayed up building systems, charts, notes, anything that helped people work together better. But no one really clapped for that. Eli went off to majored in engineering and came home wearing startup hoodies and talking about disruption like it was a sermon. I got into Columbia, studied behavioral strategy, and started working in product development at a mid-sized tech firm in New York. We weren't that far apart on paper, but in our family only one of us got asked about work at Thanksgiving. After graduation, Eli started a company called StreamPulse. It was flashy. He had investors and a podcast and a logo. He printed on everything. I took a quieter path, worked my way up from analyst to director at Trident Systems, built roadmaps, led integrations, helped teams run smoother. But whenever we were all at Grandma's house or back at church, folks still asked if I was doing some kind of marketing thing. Eli never corrected them. Neither did I. It just got easier not to explain. Then one morning, I was eating a stale muffin at my desk, flipping through an internal proposal, and there it was, StreamPulse, right at the top of our firm's potential acquisition list. I clicked on it, thinking it must be some other company with the same name. But no, there it was, Eli Bishop, founder and chief technology officer. I stared at the screen a long while, not moving, just listening to the hum of the office and the distant sound of someone's phone ringing. His dream was falling apart, and mine was the team being asked to evaluate whether it could be saved. That's when I knew something in our family story was about to change forever. It had been a few weeks since I saw Eli's company on that report, and even though I'd kept my role quiet, documented everything by the book, stayed out of the meetings, I knew where things were heading. Trident's acquisition team was moving fast. They had to. The tech behind StreamPulse had promise, but the numbers were rough, and the business structure wasn't built to last. I wasn't surprised, not really. I'd been watching Eli spin gold from yarn for years. The presentations always looked good, clean logos, buzzwords, mock-ups that made investors nod along. But underneath there were gaps, big ones. The hardest part wasn't doing the work. It was listening to Eli talk like nothing was wrong. I saw him a few times that month, first at Mom's birthday dinner, then again at a Sunday lunch at Aunt Kathy's. He talked about a new partnership in the works, about expanding into smart grid applications. Said he'd been invited to speak at a panel downtown. Dad was beaming, nodding through the whole thing. I sat across from them, sipping my water and listening while Eli explained how StreamPulse was scaling their product for industrial clients. I already knew the truth. There was no scalability plan, no roadmap, no structure for onboarding. It wasn't personal. It was just what the data said. Grandma Lucille caught my eye as he tossed a quiet glance across the table, one eyebrow slightly raised. She never interrupted, just reached for the rolls and kept the rhythm of the meal steady like always. I didn't say anything either. I stirred my soup and nodded when people talked. But inside, something was shifting. Not anger exactly, just a heaviness like standing outside your own life and watching someone else tell the story. A few nights later, Dad called me. He asked if I'd thought about picking Eli's brain, maybe seeing if he could help me get into something a little more ambitious. I remember holding the phone, staring at the ceiling fan slowly turning above me. I said, "Sure, Dad. Maybe I'll ask." He meant well. He always did. But they still thought I was running digital ads for some mid-tier agency. No one had asked about my new title or the team I was leading or the integration I'd just wrapped with a Fortune 100 client. Eli filled the air with so much noise there wasn't room for much else. At family dinners, the questions always went to him. How's funding going? What's next for the platform? When are you launching version 2? I'd answer politely when asked, but the questions were never the kind that suggested they were listening. More like they were being polite. After a while, I stopped correcting anyone. It didn't seem worth the trouble. Then came Easter. We were packed around the dining room table like always folding chairs, added in on each end to fit everyone in. Aunt Kathy brought her macaroni pie, and someone passed a basket of biscuits, already going cold. Eli had a fresh haircut, new blazer, and was doing most of the talking. I kept quiet, just cutting my ham into small, even bites, smiling, when someone looked my way. That's when he said it. "Not everyone's cut out for a real job in tech." It came out light like a joke, like something you say without thinking. But he looked right at me when he said it. His voice wasn't raised. He didn't smirk. He just let the words land easy and casual, like they didn't mean anything. I didn't say a word, just kept cutting my green beans, nodding like always. Then Grandma put her fork down. "So you bought his company out of pity," she said, plain and clear, not loud, but enough to stop every hand mid-reach. Even the baby 2 seats down stopped fussing. I looked up slowly. The room was frozen. "I didn't buy his company," I said. "My company did. I led the evaluation that recommended the acquisition." Eli's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He stared at me. "Wait, what?" he asked. Dad looked confused. Mom blinked. "You're not even in acquisitions," Eli said. "You're in marketing or strategy or something." I told him. "I'm director of strategic planning now. I lead integration strategy for our energy division." There was a long pause. Then Heather, Eli's wife, spoke up soft and careful. "I saw Marlene's name on the integration paperwork," she said. "I assumed you knew." Eli turned toward her sharply. "You what?" She shrugged slightly. It wasn't hidden. He turned back to me. His voice got louder. "So you were sitting back pulling strings behind the scenes while I—" "No one pulled anything I said. Your technology had value, but your business didn't have structure. We offered a deal that preserved what was still working, your staff, your name." His face flushed. "So you did buy it out of pity." Before I could answer, Grandma spoke again. "No, sweetheart. She bought it out of competence." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. Eli's jaw was tight, but he didn't speak right away. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" he said finally. "Watched me struggle and stayed quiet, just so you could swoop in and take everything." I stood not fast, just steady. "You want the truth?" I asked. "I never felt seen, not by you, not by Mom and Dad. But what I did at Trident wasn't revenge, it was strategy. It was leadership." He shook his head. "So you think that makes you better than me?" "No," I said. "It makes me someone who sees the whole board, not just one piece." He didn't respond, just pushed his chair back and left the room. The door clicked shut behind him. No one moved for a long moment. Then Grandma reached for the water pitcher and said, calm as ever, "Let's pass some perspective first." That's when the room exhaled. You could hear it. Knives against plates again. Chairs scooting slightly. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. I looked down at my plate. The food was cold now. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be like before. The air in the dining room felt heavier after Eli walked out. No one moved for a while. You could hear the refrigerator hum and the soft clink of silverware against china. Heather sat down slowly, folding her napkin like she didn't know what else to do with her hands. I stayed standing for a beat longer, then pulled my chair back in and sat again. Grandma didn't say another word. She just rested her hand lightly over mine. Across the table, Michael gave me a small nod, the kind he gives when things feel just a little too sharp around the edges. We all picked at our plates after that, though no one really ate. A few half-hearted comments floated around about the tulips in bloom or whether it might rain later that week, but none of them stuck. The food had gone cold. The conversation didn't quite know where to go. I thought that might be the end of it. A rough dinner, a quiet week, maybe a call from Mom pretending nothing happened. That's how things usually went. We didn't talk about the awkward stuff. We just let time soften the edges and pretended everything had always been fine. But this time was different. Mom was the first one to speak again. She was passing the bread basket to Aunt Kathy when she paused, looked down the length of the table and said, "Marlene, why didn't you ever tell us how far you'd come in your career?" I looked up slowly. Everyone was watching me now. I wasn't sure what to say at first. Not because I didn't have the words, but because no one had asked before. I guess I got used to thinking no one wanted to know, I said. Dad leaned back in his chair, his face shifting in a way I hadn't seen before. "That's not true," he said. It came out quiet, like he wasn't even sure who he was saying it to. "Maybe not intentionally," I answered. But Eli's accomplishments always took up so much space. There wasn't really room for mine. Eli hadn't returned, but it felt like his absence was still sitting at the table. Grandma reached for her water glass and held it steady. "That ends now," she said. Michael added, "Marlene leads one of the most respected planning teams in the industry. Her group's not just responding to change, they're the ones setting the pace." Aunt Kathy blinked. "That's true." Before I could answer, Grandma spoke again. "It is. You all thought Eli was the only one with a mind for tech. But Marlene's been building something stronger, something that lasts." Heather looked across the table, her voice soft. I looked her up after I saw her name in the integration files. Her portfolio's impressive. More than I expected. Even Dad looked surprised. "I had no idea," he said. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. We should have asked." I nodded, not in anger, just with the quiet recognition of someone who had stopped expecting the question. "It's okay," I said. "We all just got used to a certain version of the story. I stopped trying to rewrite it." Grandma lifted her glass a little higher. "Well," she said, "here's to rewrites." A few chuckles moved around the table. Not loud, but real. Something had loosened. Something we'd all been holding without knowing it had been set down for just a moment. Dessert came out not long after. Pecan pie, Eli's favorite. I figured we'd coast through the rest of the evening, maybe even laugh a little, pretend things hadn't cracked open the way they had. But before we could pass the plates, Eli came back in. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled out his chair and sat beside Heather like nothing had happened. Forks hovered, hands stilled. Grandma didn't look away from him. Uncle Marty cleared his throat. "Everything all right?" Eli looked up. "We're working on it," he said. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it wasn't denial either. And for Eli, that was something. We finished the meal with the kind of conversation you have when everyone's still trying to find safe ground. Weather vacation plans, someone's new dog, the usual. But underneath it all, there was a current running through the table, like we were all still waiting to see what would really come next. Just before the dishes were cleared, Eli stood up again. He didn't raise his voice. He just spoke. "I owe you all something," he said. "Especially you, Marlene." The room went still again. "I didn't just ignore your work," he continued. "I minimized it. Because if I admitted how successful you were, I'd have to admit I wasn't the only one who mattered." His voice didn't break. He didn't look away. "You deserve recognition," he said. Not because you're my sister, because you earned it. I didn't speak, just gave a small nod. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. 3 months later, we were sitting across from each other in the Trident cafeteria. Eli was hunched over a tablet pointing at a diagram with a plastic fork. I think if we refactor the load balance here, he said, we could trim the latency by at least 20%. I nodded, which will make that client very, very happy. He grinned, especially the one you helped land. It was still surprising how natural it had started to feel. At first it was awkward. He was defensive. I was careful. But over time we figured out a rhythm. He stopped bracing every time someone gave him feedback. I stopped hesitating when I opened my mouth. Our parents had visited the office a few weeks earlier. Mom brought cookies. Dad asked about the coffee machine like it was part of the product. But when they saw both our names on the wall outside the strategy suite, Dad stood still a long time. Then he smiled, really smiled at me. That night he asked about my work first. Even Grandma noticed. She invited us both for Sunday pot roast. After the dishes were cleared, she took our hands and said, "You two are like current and circuit. Can't do much without both." Eli laughed. "She means we make a good team." "Don't get cocky," I told him. He leaned back for a second, quiet. "You know, he said I used to think being in charge meant being the smartest person in the room." I waited. "But I think it means listening to the people who see what you can't." I didn't say anything. "We're still building," I said. He nodded. "But this time we're not building alone." It was a Tuesday when something shifted, though at first glance it felt like any other day. Eli and I had started meeting for lunch once a week in the Trident cafeteria, something unspoken that had become routine. He always brought a tablet half filled with sketches and system diagrams. I brought a legal pad full of rollout notes and timelines. We usually sat near the windows where the light came through soft and clear and just talked. That afternoon, he was working on a refactor for the energy forecasting module. His hands moved as he spoke, fork tapping the screen here and there while he explained his plan for reducing latency. I followed along, asked a few questions about deployment speed, offered a note on client-side efficiency, nothing dramatic, just the kind of quiet back and forth that used to be impossible between us. But it wasn't the content that stayed with me. It was the pause between his sentences, the way he listened now, how he waited when I spoke not just to respond, but to understand. Later we walked the long hallway back toward the elevator. He was quieter there, looking ahead at the lighted floor numbers as we waited. "You know," he said, "I'm still figuring out how to let go of the idea that I have to lead every room I walk into." I didn't say anything. Some things didn't need answers. Our first real collaboration came a few weeks after that. We were presenting the integrated roadmap for Trident's energy platform at a company-wide town hall. Eli walked through the technical vision architecture scalability, the platform's evolution. I followed with the go-to-market plan and long-range implementation strategy. We stood side by side in front of a few hundred employees, engineers, managers, department heads. And for once, there wasn't any tension. No unspoken competition. Just two people focused on building something better. After the session backstage, he leaned against the wall and said, "That actually went better than I expected." I smiled. "You didn't even roll your eyes once." He laughed short and real. "Progress." By then, StreamPulse was fully integrated into Trident's core systems. Eli had shifted into a lead advisory role under Marcus, our head of systems engineering. It was a smart fit. Marcus had the structure Eli sometimes lacked, and Eli brought the edge Marcus appreciated. I stayed focused on strategy and planning, but we checked in often. What started as syncs turned into problem-solving sessions. Sometimes they'd stretch into the evening, but the more time we spent working together, the more I noticed something sitting under the surface. It wasn't resistance anymore, and it wasn't rivalry. It was something else. One afternoon, after a long meeting with our energy clients, Eli stuck around. He didn't sit, just stood by the window in my office, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. "Do you ever feel like Someone's going to find out you've just been winging it? He asked. I looked up from my screen. What do you mean? He shrugged. Like, if anyone really looked close enough, they'd figure out you don't actually know what you're doing, that you're just hoping it doesn't all fall apart. It wasn't what I expected from him. Not the boy who used to win every science fair, not the man who used to talk through pitch decks like they were second nature. But I didn't laugh. I didn't try to reassure him. I just said I think a lot more people feel that way than you think. He didn't answer, just looked out at the glass and the skyline beyond it. Later that week, we got word that one of our biggest prospects, an energy conglomerate we'd been courting for months, had signed on for a full platform integration. It was a milestone for the team. We stood outside the executive suite while the contract was finalized. Eli gave a quiet whistle. Your strategy sealed it, he said. I shook my head. Your tech made it viable. He turned to look at me. Both mattered. That weekend, our parents came to see the office. Mom brought lemon bars in a glass dish with a chipped lid. Dad wandered around asking questions about what a tech stack meant and how cloud servers worked. The staff answered kindly. When they saw both our names on the glass wall outside the planning suite, Dad stood there for a long time. He turned to me, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said, I didn't know you did all this. I smiled. You never asked. Mom smoothed her shirt sleeve and gave a little laugh. We just thought, well, Eli always talks so much about his projects. Eli was nearby. He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. He just said, she's been building this long before StreamPulse existed. That night, I sat on my apartment porch with a mug of tea. The lights of the city were steady out in the distance. I thought about all the years I'd kept quiet, waiting for someone else to open the door. Now I was the one holding the key. But just as the air was starting to feel clear again, something showed up I wasn't expecting. An email, flagged urgent. It came in from legal just before midnight. There was a discrepancy in one of StreamPulse's early funding reports. Nothing explosive at first glance, just 2 names listed as early contributors who didn't appear on any of the official filings during acquisition. I reread the message. One of the names jumped out at me, George Heller. I remembered him vaguely from a cookout years ago. A quiet man with a deep voice. He always seemed to be talking to Eli just out of earshot. The second name didn't ring a bell, but the signature didn't match any of the others. I sat back in my chair, turned the message over in my mind. Cross-referenced what I could with our onboarding records. Neither name had been disclosed in Eli's transition paperwork. It wasn't something I could ignore, not with our new client contracts, not with regulatory filings still in progress. I called Marcus first thing the next morning, walked him through what I'd seen. We agreed to keep it quiet for now, no assumptions, just facts. When I passed Eli in the hallway later that morning, he asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I told him sure, but I already knew it wasn't going to be an ordinary lunch. We met at the cafe across the street, the one with the soft lighting and the quiet booths that gave you space to breathe. Eli was already seated when I walked in, tapping something into his phone, a half-empty coffee cup next to him. He looked up, gave a small smile. I sat down and pulled a folded page from my bag. I need to ask you something, I said, sliding the paper across the table. He glanced down, scanning the printed names. His expression didn't change right away, but I saw his jaw tighten. George Heller, he said, tapping his finger lightly on the page. Yeah. He contributed in the first round. He's not listed anywhere in your official filings, I said. Beacon has no record of him. Eli looked again, slower this time. We had a side agreement, he said. It was early, just a handshake deal. He came in through a convertible note. I kept my voice even. That's not how our compliance reviews work. If it wasn't documented, it's a liability. He let out a slow breath and leaned back. I wasn't trying to hide anything. We were scrambling. I needed the capital and George had connections. His firm's been flagged before, I said. It complicates things. We'll have to refile our disclosures, including with our newest clients. He looked out the window, eyes following something in the street I couldn't see. I didn't think any of this would follow me. We can stay ahead of it, I said, but we need to move fast. He nodded, though his shoulders stayed tight. You think this is going to sink the deal? No, I said. But it might change how people view the foundation. He didn't respond. Just picked up the page again, turned it over in his hands like maybe it would say something different the second time. That weekend, Michael and I went out to Grandma Lucille's. We brought a casserole and her favorite apple crumble. She had the table set before we even got through the door. The air smelled like sage and coffee, and she greeted us both with a nod, no questions. After dinner, she poured 2 cups of tea and joined me on the porch. The garden had started to bloom along the fence line. You're quiet, she said. It's been a strange week, I told her. She waited. I think Eli's trying to find solid ground, I said. But now it feels like it's shifting under both of us. She looked toward the edge of the yard. Sometimes people build so fast they don't check what they're standing on. I nodded. And when it cracks, she added, they go looking for someone who won't let them fall through. I didn't answer. Just let the silence fill the space between us. By Monday, Eli showed up at my office door. His shirt was wrinkled, his collar loose, and he looked like he hadn't slept much. I updated the disclosures he said. Marcus walked me through it. I've got a call with compliance this afternoon. I motioned to the chair across from me. Want to sit? He did. Let out a long breath. It's a lot, he said. I waited. I didn't want you to see that version of me, he added. The one who cut corners. Who rushed things. I thought I could outrun it. I kept my hands folded in my lap. You're not the only founder who's made fast calls under pressure, I said. He looked at me. You think they'll pull the plug? No, I said, but they'll be watching, and you'll need to lead differently now. He nodded, then stood and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Thank you, he said, for not walking away from this. Keep walking forward, I replied. That's what matters now. By the end of the week, Marcus handed me a thin folder after our planning meeting. He didn't speak right away, just tapped the cover. They found something else, he said quietly. It's not catastrophic, but it's layered. I opened the file. A backdoor access module had been discovered in StreamPulse's original infrastructure. It wasn't malicious, but it bypassed standard authentication and had never been removed. It gave full visibility into client-side data and had been active since the prototype phase. Risk flagged it immediately. He likely built it during testing, Marcus said, but it stayed in the code. I closed the folder. We need to bring him in. When I reached Eli's desk, he already had the audit notice pulled up. Let me guess, he said. The back door, I nodded. They're pulling in security and risk. He motioned to the chair beside him. I built that early, he said. We didn't have test automation set up, and I needed a way to simulate usage. I always meant to remove it. I just didn't. He didn't offer an excuse, just shook his head. That's the truth. It was a miss. A big one. I asked, did you ever use it? No, he said. Not once. I knew it was there, but I never touched it after the pilot phase. The issue isn't whether it was used, I said. It's that it existed, without review. He nodded slowly. I should have scrubbed it. I knew better. That afternoon, he sat for 3 hours with legal compliance and security. No defensiveness, no blame. When he walked out, he came straight to my office. I was careless, he said. They asked who else had access to that module, wanted to know if anyone helped write it. I waited. No one did, he said. That part was mine. You'll need to put that in writing, I told him. I've already started the statement. That night I stayed behind after most of the lights in the building had gone out. I reread the audit reports, made notes where our deployment roadmap would need to adjust, and forwarded them to Marcus. Then I saw the message sitting in my inbox. It was from Eli. Just one line. Thank you for staying in this with me. On Saturday, I went to help Grandma Lucille clear boxes from her attic. Michael dropped me off before running errands. The attic smelled of cedar and old linen. I opened a box labeled Eli, High School Projects, and sat cross-legged on the wooden floor. Inside were early sketches, code printouts, and a rubber-banded group of USB drives. Tucked beneath them was a folded letter, my grandmother's handwriting across the front. To Eli, when the shine fades, remember who you are. I didn't open it, just held it for a moment before placing it back where I found it. When I came downstairs, Grandma had coffee poured. She didn't ask what I'd found, just handed me a plate of sliced apples and waited until I sat. I think he's beginning to understand, I said. She stirred her cup. Understanding isn't the same as carrying it. I nodded. He's learning to listen. She didn't say anything more, just sipped her coffee as the afternoon sun moved across the kitchen floor. The compliance review was completed by the following Thursday. Trident's leadership released a quiet internal statement, just a few paragraphs, acknowledging that a legacy module had been discovered in the StreamPulse codebase and had since been patched. No client data was affected, no breach occurred, but the message was clear. The foundation had been shaken, and we were the ones tasked with repairing it. At our next sync, Eli presented a revised architecture model. It included a new auditing layer, stricter version control, and formal review checkpoints. Marcus listened closely, nodding as Eli walked through the revisions. There was no applause, no raised voices, just focused eyes, and the quiet sense of a team doing the work it needed to do. After the meeting, I walked with Eli toward the cafeteria. He was quiet for a while, then said, "Can I ask you something?" Of course, I said. If that back door had been used, if it had caused damage, would Beacon have walked away? I paused. Yes, I said. We would have had no choice. He nodded slowly, kept walking beside me. And you? I looked at him. I would have stepped back, but I wouldn't have turned away. He didn't respond right away, but after a few more steps, he said, "I believe that." We got in line for lunch, and I realized something. The damage had been real, but so was the repair, not just in the code, in the way we worked, in the way we listened. Eli had built something worth saving, and now he was learning how to protect it. The next few weeks were quiet in the best way. StreamPulse's integration timeline moved ahead of schedule. The revised architecture passed its final audit. The new access controls were deployed smoothly, and the update reached all client systems within 48 hours. No one made a big deal about it, but the trust had shifted. I watched the way engineers responded to Eli in meetings, the way he deferred when someone raised a concern. He didn't push. He didn't brush things off. One afternoon, I was heading down to the lobby when Eli stepped onto the elevator just as the doors were closing. He was holding a folder and a half-empty cup of coffee. "You heading out?" he asked. "Just for a bit," I said. "Client call from home." He nodded. After a moment, he said, "I've been thinking about Easter." I glanced over. "I wasn't ready to hear the truth that day," he said. "I think I always assumed I had more time, that I'd prove I could hold everything up on my own. I didn't speak." He looked ahead at the elevator lights, but I couldn't. Not really. And I think building something doesn't mean being the smartest person in the room. It means letting other people help carry it. We stepped into the lobby together. He didn't linger, just gave a quiet nod, and turned toward the east wing. That Sunday, we were both at Grandma Lucille's again for dinner. She made her usual pot roast. Michael brought sourdough rolls from the bakery on 3rd Street. The table was full, Aunt Kathy, Uncle Marty, the twins, everyone talking over one another, passing dishes, reaching for seconds. It felt easier than it had in months. After dinner, Eli helped clear the table without being asked. He stood beside me at the sink, sleeves rolled up drying plates while I washed. Grandma sat in the breakfast nook, her tea in hand, just watching. At one point, Eli looked over at her. "You always saw it, didn't you?" She tilted her head slightly. That Marlene was the one actually building something real. Grandma didn't blink. "I saw both of you," she said. "Just took the rest of the room a while to catch up." He nodded and handed me another plate to rinse. Later, just before we left, Eli walked me out to the car. The porch light was on, and the air had that early spring coolness. He leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets. "I've got a meeting with the board next week," he said. "They're asking if I want to stay on full time." I turned toward him. "Do you?" He nodded. "I think I do, but not to run anything. Not the way I used to, just to be part of it." We stood quietly for a minute, the neighborhood soft around us. A dog barked somewhere nearby. A car door shut across the street. "I owe you something," he said. "And I don't just mean for the acquisition. I mean for everything you held up while I was too busy trying to be the story." I didn't respond. "You gave my work a second chance," he said. "And you didn't do it for credit. You did it because it mattered." I looked at him. "You did the work I said. I just made sure it had a path forward." He shook his head slightly. "No. You saw what I couldn't. And then you stayed, even when I made it hard. We hugged before parting, no stiffness, no hesitating, just quiet understanding." The next morning, I arrived at the main conference room 10 minutes before the town hall. The new presentation deck was already loaded. I stood by the podium flipping through the slides one last time when Eli walked in and took his place by the second monitor. We had built the dual presentation format together, strategy and technical, no hierarchy, just a shared voice. The room began to fill. Marcus sat in the back row with the engineering team. Heather came in with Grandma Lucille beside her, both sitting near the aisle. Grandma's hands were folded in her lap, her gaze steady behind her glasses. We opened the session together. Eli introduced the next phase of the platform's energy modeling. I followed with our roadmap for client rollout and sustainability metrics. We passed the mic back and forth, clear and practiced. No stumbles, no need to compete. When the meeting ended, we stayed near the front answering questions from team leads. At one point, I looked up and met Grandma's eyes. She didn't smile, just gave a slow nod, the kind that said, "This is what I knew you were capable of." As we packed up, Eli handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it later," he said. "You'll understand." I tucked it into my notebook and walked out into the late morning sun. I didn't feel like I was stepping out from someone else's shadow anymore. I opened the envelope that night after dinner. I'd almost forgotten about it until I noticed it peeking out of my notebook on the kitchen counter. It was a small cream card folded once down the middle. Eli's handwriting filled only a few lines. For years I thought legacy was about leaving your name on the door, but it turns out it's about who you trust with the keys. Thank you for holding the door open when I didn't deserve it. There was no signature, just a small ink mark in the corner, a tiny triangle, the one Grandma Lucille used to draw in the margins of her garden plans. It meant planted with care. That Friday, I stopped by the Trident office to finalize the terms of Eli's new role. He had accepted a long-term advisory seat on the product board and transitioned out of day-to-day operations. Marcus had agreed to the new structure, and the board backed it unanimously. We shook hands in the conference room, nothing formal, just a quiet moment between colleagues. Then we walked together through the office floor one last time. The engineering team had redecorated the StreamPulse bullpen since the acquisition. The walls were lined with whiteboards again, but now they held diagrams and flowcharts built by teams, not individuals. I saw new names on the sprint board. Some I didn't recognize. That was a good thing. At Eli's old desk, he paused. Someone else was sitting there now, a junior engineer named Lana, fresh out of grad school. She had 2 monitors running a half-eaten sandwich on one side and her shoes kicked off under the desk. "She's better than I was at that age," he said, just loud enough for me to hear. He didn't linger. That evening we met Grandma Lucille for dinner at a small Italian place near her old library. The restaurant had low lighting and those red checkered tablecloths you hardly see anymore. Grandma ordered eggplant parmesan. I had minestrone and a salad. Eli went with baked ziti and didn't say much until dessert. She told me something he said as we waited for the coffee. Marlene never needed permission. That was the difference. Grandma looked at him, her fork resting on the edge of her plate. You waited for someone to say it was your turn, she said gently. She just started building. He nodded. After we paid, we stood outside by the street, the cool night air brushing against our coats. Eli walked Grandma to her car. Before getting in, she touched his arm. You gave her room to lead, she said. That's worth more than catching up. He watched her drive off before turning back to me. There's one more thing I'd like to do, he said. The next morning, we met at the Beacon building just after 8. It was Saturday, so the place was quiet. He led me up to the 10th floor where they'd just finished renovating the East Wing Beacon's new innovation archive. He'd been collecting pieces from the earliest phases of Trident and Stream Pulse source code snippets, first draft notes, an old presentation binder from when Eli pitched to his first angel investor. I hadn't realized how much he'd kept. One display case in the center held 2 flash drives, one red, one blue. This one, he said, tapping the red, was the backup Grandma kept in her sewing kit. She didn't even know what was on it. He turned to me. I'd like to add something. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the one I used to sketch flow improvements in the early Stream Pulse prototypes. I thought I'd lost it. He opened to the last page. You wrote this, he said after a 16-hour debug sprint. You said this platform deserves humility built into its bones. He placed the notebook in the case beside the drives. I didn't understand that line until this year. We stood in silence a moment longer. Then I turned to leave. At the elevators, I looked back. Eli was still standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes on the case. On my way home, I stopped by the bookstore Grandma loved on Maple Street. I bought a blank journal and wrote one sentence on the first page. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you make room for. A few months later, I found myself standing in the hallway of a small community tech center just outside Madison. The room smelled like fresh paint and pencil shavings. A line of secondhand laptops buzzed on a long folding table, and a group of high school girls were huddled around one of them, arguing over how to fix a broken loop in a Python script. I was there at Grandma Lucille's suggestion. She'd started volunteering with a few local programs, quietly encouraging young women in tech long before it became a buzzword. When she asked if I'd help lead a workshop, I said yes without thinking twice. One of the girls asked me if I'd ever worked on anything big. I smiled and told her I used to build tools to help people talk to each other. She nodded like she understood. Then she asked if that ever made me feel powerful. I paused before answering. It made me feel useful, I said. And that felt better than powerful. After the session, I stayed to help clean up. Eli had driven down that morning bringing coffee and extra cords. He lingered near the door, watching the girls file out with their notebooks and questions. When the last one left, he picked up a stray hoodie from the floor and folded it over the back of a chair. She reminded me of you, he said. I didn't ask who. I knew he meant the girl with the quiet focus and bitten nails, the one who rewrote the same block of code 5 times until it ran without errors. We drove back together that evening, taking the long way past the lake. The windows were cracked, the radio low. Somewhere near the county line, Eli asked me if I still kept that notebook, the one with the old diagrams and process maps. I told him I donated it to the archive. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, maybe that's what legacy really is, making sure someone else can pick up the thread. I looked out at the water, its surface soft and rippling in the evening light. The house felt quiet when I got home. Peaceful, not empty. I made tea, sat in the kitchen, and looked over a letter I'd been meaning to send to one of the girls from the program. I added a note at the bottom. Never wait for someone to tell you you're ready. Just begin. That night before bed, I found the little triangle sketch Grandma used to draw. I pinned it to my corkboard beside a photo of us from the garden, knees in the dirt, hands full of seedlings, both of us smiling without looking at the camera. It reminded me that some things grow because we tend them slowly, patiently, without asking for credit. And sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it's as quiet as handing over the tools and stepping back. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from, and if you're starting over building something new or just finding your voice again, know that you're not alone. Hoy ChatGPT.